How much is peace worth? For me, the answer lay in 2 feet of muddy water flooding my basement, $47,000 in damage, and an envelope from the HOA. Not a letter of sympathy, but a lawsuit demanding $175,000 for allegedly destroying the community drainage system. I had never built anything, but they did not know one thing about me. I am a hydrology engineer with 18 years of experience. When I measured the slope of the water flowing into my home, I discovered the truth. It was not following natural gravity. It was engineered to pour directly toward me. They built underground pipes to redirect floodwater into my house. Then they blamed me for the damage. 14 months later, they lost $8.2 million. Comment below where you are watching from. The smell hit me before my feet touched the bottom step. That thick, rotting odor of stagnant water mixed with mud and something else. Something chemical, like rusted metal bleeding into soil. I stood in my basement at 7:15 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in June, watching brown water lap against cardboard boxes that held years of work documents, family photographs, and equipment I had spent a lifetime collecting. The waterline on the wall reached my knee height, a dark stain marking where destruction had crept in overnight while thunder masked every sound outside. My name is Derek Hollister, 42 years old, and I have spent my entire career at the Colorado Water Management Bureau studying how water moves through systems. I know drainage patterns the way some people know their morning commute, and standing there in that flooded basement, I knew immediately that something was deeply wrong. I waded through the murky water toward my workbench, where an envelope sat propped against a ruined computer monitor. The paper was dry, which meant someone had placed it there after the flooding started. Probably slipped through my mail slot during those early morning hours when the storm still howled against my windows, and I slept through it all, exhausted from a 14-hour workday. I tore it open with wet fingers and read the header Pinecrest Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. Official notice of legal action. The letter accused me of violating community bylaws by constructing an unauthorized barrier that blocked natural water flow, causing catastrophic damage to the shared drainage infrastructure. They demanded $175,000 in restitution. At the bottom, a single line warned that failure to respond within 30 days would result in property liens and potential foreclosure proceedings. My hands trembled as I read it a second time, then a third. The words blurred together as disbelief gave way to something sharper. I felt my chest tighten, not from fear, but from the sheer absurdity of what I was holding. Every instinct I had developed over nearly 2 decades in water management screamed that this accusation was not just wrong, it was impossible. I had never built anything on this property except a repaired back porch. No barriers, no walls, no modifications to any drainage system. I had purchased this house 2 years ago precisely because it sat at the lowest point of Pinecrest Ridge, meaning natural water flow would carry runoff away from the foundation, not toward it. That was basic hydrology, fundamental physics that any first-year engineering student would understand. Yet here I stood in evidence that contradicted everything I knew about how water should behave on this terrain. The flooding made no sense. The accusation was made even less. What troubled me most was the direction from which the water had entered. The mud streaks on the walls showed clearly that the surge had come from the north side of my property, not the west, where the natural slope descended toward the creek. I climbed back upstairs and walked into my backyard, still wearing soaked boots that squelched with every step. The morning sun cast long shadows across the lawn as I traced the water damage pattern toward its origin. That is when I noticed something I had never seen before. Partially concealed behind my wooden fence and a thick row of overgrown juniper bushes that the previous owner had planted along the property line, a concrete drainage pipe, roughly 24 inches in diameter, jutted from the ground at an angle pointing directly at my yard. The shrubs had grown wild over the past 2 years, dense enough to hide the pipe completely from my normal sightline whenever I walked the perimeter. I pushed through the branches and examined the concrete more closely. The surface was clean, unstained by years of weathering or moss accumulation. This was new construction, perhaps less than 2 years old, installed sometime around when I first moved in or shortly after. I pulled out my phone and opened the county infrastructure database, searching for any record of drainage installations in this section of Pinecrest Ridge. The result came back empty. According to official records, no drainage pipes had been permitted or installed in this area for at least 5 years. Yet here it stood, hidden deliberately behind vegetation, aimed at my property like a weapon waiting to fire. I retrieved my surveying equipment from the garage, grateful that I had stored it on upper shelves beyond the flood's reach. For 2 hours, I measured the terrain gradient from that mysterious pipe to my basement entrance. The numbers confirmed what my instincts had already told me. The slope measured exactly 4.2%, a precise angle designed to accelerate water flow toward a specific destination. Natural erosion does not create such uniform gradients. This pipe had been engineered by someone who understood hydraulics, someone who knew exactly where the water would end up. I photographed everything: the pipe, the measurements, the water lines on my basement walls, building a record that I did not yet fully understand, but somehow knew I would need. That evening, my phone buzzed with an email notification. The sender was Meredith Blackwood, HOA president. Her message was brief and carried the unmistakable tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Mr. Hollister, I hope we can resolve this matter civilly. However, if you continue refusing responsibility, the board will have no choice but to inform all 127 households about the individual threatening our community infrastructure. They deserve to know who is endangering their homes. I stared at the screen, reading between the lines of her polite threat. She was not asking me to pay for damage I caused. She was demanding I take blame for something she knew I had not done. The question was why, and what that hidden drainage pipe had to do with her desperation to silence me. 72 hours after Meredith Blackwood sent her email, I discovered that I had become the public enemy of Pinecrest Ridge Estates. The transformation happened faster than I could have imagined, orchestrated with a precision that suggested careful planning long before the floodwater ever touched my basement floor. It began with a notification on the Neighborhood Community Board, a platform where 847 residents shared everything from lost pet alerts to complaints about trash collection schedules. The HOA official account had posted an update titled, "Drainage System Damage Update, One Homeowner Refuses to Cooperate." The post did not mention my name directly, but it included a photograph taken from an angle that clearly showed my house, my mailbox, and my car parked in the driveway. Within 24 hours, 143 comments had accumulated beneath that post, each one more vicious than the last. I scrolled through the responses with a growing sense of disbelief. Selfish neighbor putting his property above everyone else's safety. People like this should be forced out of the community. Who approved this person's application to live here in the first place? The comments kept coming. Strangers who had never spoken to me suddenly convinced that I was a threat to their homes, their families, their property values. A second discussion thread appeared on another neighborhood platform, generating 89 similar responses within 48 hours. I recognized some of the names from community events I had attended when I first moved in. Neighbors who had smiled and welcomed me to Pinecrest Ridge, now calling for my removal. The speed of the public condemnation felt choreographed, as if someone had been waiting for exactly the right moment to release a flood of outrage against me. The official notice arrived 3 days later. HOA Resolution Number 2023-47 demanded that I remediate all drainage damage within 30 days or face daily fines of $500 plus potential asset seizure proceedings. The document was signed by Meredith Blackwood as president and Gerald Ashford as vice president, two names I had seen on welcome letters when I purchased my home, but had rarely encountered since. I was not invited to the emergency board meeting where this resolution was passed. Instead, I received a brief notification informing me that results would be communicated following deliberation. The democratic process that supposedly governed our community had become a tribunal where the accused had no voice and no vote, and the verdict had been written before the trial ever began. The financial pressure escalated within the same week. My mortgage lender called on Thursday afternoon, a woman with a professional but concerned tone, explaining that the HOA had submitted an official dispute notice directly to their legal department, flagging my property as subject to active litigation. Under Clause 7.3 of your mortgage agreement, Mr. Hollister, we are required to assess any circumstances that might affect the property's value or your ability to maintain payments. Can you confirm the status of this situation? I assured her that the accusations were unfounded. but I could hear the doubt in her silence before she hung up. 2 days later, my homeowner's insurance company sent a formal letter denying my claim for basement flood damage. Their preliminary internal review, conducted without any on-site inspection, had concluded that the damage likely resulted from homeowner modifications. Damage resulting from homeowner negligence or unauthorized modifications is excluded from coverage under Section 4, Paragraph B of your policy. The decision had been made based on the HOA's complaint alone. The final blow came from a law firm I had never heard of, Morrison & Caldwell LLP, representing the Pinecrest Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. Their letter outlined 2 options with the cold efficiency of an ultimatum. Option 1. Deposit $25,000 in escrow as a legal defense fund if I wished to contest the HOA's claims in court. Option 2. Accept a settlement agreement, acknowledging responsibility, and pay $175,000 in restitution, with a payment plan available for qualified applicants. The letter closed with a reminder that litigation would be costly, time-consuming, and ultimately futile given the documented evidence of my negligence. I had become trapped in a machine designed to crush resistance through financial exhaustion, public humiliation, and bureaucratic suffocation. Every door I tried to open led to another wall built specifically to keep me silent. The knock on my door came at 9:15 p.m., long after the sun had set and most of my neighbors had retreated into their homes to avoid any association with the community pariah. I opened the door to find Linda Mayfield standing on my porch, a woman in her late 40s who lived 3 houses down at number 1847. She glanced over her shoulder nervously before speaking in a voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Hollister, I do not believe what they are saying about you. Last year, my backyard flooded during a storm that was not even that severe. When I complained to Meredith, she told me it was just natural terrain drainage and nothing could be done. But here is the thing that has been bothering me ever since." She paused, checking the street again before continuing. "My house sits 12 feet higher than yours on the slope. Water does not flow uphill. Mr. Hollister, it cannot flood my yard and then somehow drain down to yours unless something is pushing it in directions it should not go." Her words hit me with the force of revelation. I thanked Linda and watched her disappear into the shadows before closing my door and moving directly to my laptop. If her property, situated at a higher elevation, had experienced unexplained flooding, then the drainage anomaly extended far beyond my basement. Someone had been manipulating water flow throughout this section of Pinecrest Ridge, channeling it away from certain homes and toward others with deliberate engineering. I opened the Jefferson County Public Records database and ran a new search, this time focusing specifically on construction permits rather than infrastructure maps. The query returned 0 results for any drainage work in Pinecrest Ridge Estates during the past 60 months. Official channels showed nothing. No applications, no approvals, no inspections. Yet that 24-inch concrete pipe sat hidden behind my fence, real and undeniable. Someone had built it without authorization, concealed it from county oversight, and was now using my ruined basement as evidence of a crime I never committed. The question burning in my mind was no longer whether I was being framed, but who had ordered the construction and what they were truly trying to protect. The morning after Linda's visit, I made a decision that would change everything. If the HOA could distort reality through public pressure and legal threats, I would counter with something they could not manipulate: hard data. I had spent my career measuring water flow, analyzing drainage systems, and understanding how terrain dictates the path of every drop of rain that falls on a landscape. Now I would use those skills to prove what I already suspected. Someone had engineered the flooding of my home, and the evidence was buried in the ground beneath Pinecrest Ridge Estates. I called my former colleague at the Water Management Bureau and arranged to rent professional GPS surveying equipment for $180 per day. By noon, I was walking the perimeter of my property with instruments capable of measuring elevation differences down to a fraction of an inch. The survey took 3 full days and revealed something I had not anticipated. Beyond the single pipe behind my fence, I discovered 3 distinct terrain anomalies in the western zone where the ground had been artificially modified to block natural water flow. These obstructions were subtle, appearing like ordinary landscaping features, but their placement was too precise to be coincidental. Each one redirected runoff from its natural eastward path and channeled it north to south, funneling water toward the lowest point in the neighborhood, my basement. On the fourth day, I rented a pipe inspection camera for $320 and began tracing the underground network. The footage confirmed what I feared. A 24-inch PVC pipe ran beneath 4 residential lots, installed at a depth of nearly 6 feet, well below the standard utility lines that homeowners might notice during routine yard work. The construction had been executed during March of 2021, according to HOA records, a period when several families had been away for spring break, and contractors could work without scrutiny. I spent the following evening reviewing HOA financial documents. Under Colorado Revised Statutes, Section 38-33.3-17, homeowners associations must make financial records available to any member upon request, and certain budget summaries are published annually. The 21 report contained a line item that made my blood run cold. Drainage System Enhancement Project, $127,000, allocated from Community Reserve Fund. No detailed specifications were attached. No contractor names were listed. No permits were referenced. The money had vanished into a project that officially did not exist. Yet I had video evidence of its construction running directly from the neighborhood's central area to the storm drain behind my property. Under Colorado Revised Statutes, Section 30-28-101, any construction altering natural water flow requires county approval and environmental impact assessment. The HOA had bypassed every legal requirement designed to protect residents like me. The next piece of the puzzle came from archived HOA meeting minutes, also publicly available under state disclosure laws. I found what I was looking for in the October 2019 records. The minutes documented a heated discussion about drainage concerns in the central neighborhood area, with Meredith Blackwood personally requesting immediate action to prevent future property damage. The document quoted her directly, "3 homes near mine suffered significant flooding last month. My own yard was affected. If this continues, we will see property values collapse in the most desirable section of Pinecrest Ridge. The board must prioritize a solution before the next storm season." 5 months later, the $127,000 drainage project was approved without any public input or engineering review. The timeline was damning. Meredith had demanded a solution. The board had allocated funds, and the water had been redirected to my doorstep. I cross-referenced property records to complete the picture. Meredith had purchased her home at 1701 Pinecrest Ridge in 2017 for $2.1 million. Current assessments valued it at $2.8 million, but the 2019 flooding near her property had triggered insurance claims totaling over $400,000 among her neighbors, and values in that immediate area had dropped between 15% and 20% if similar flooding occurred again. Meredith stood to lose at least $400,000 in equity. The drainage project had not been built to protect the community. It had been engineered to protect her investment by transferring the flood risk to someone expendable, someone living at the lowest point of the subdivision with minimal social connections and no apparent means to fight back. I had been selected as a convenient victim, a target whose financial destruction would preserve the wealth of those who controlled the HOA. The realization hit me with sudden clarity. The lawsuit was not about recovering damages. It was about establishing a false narrative before anyone could connect the dots between the unauthorized construction and the flooding of my home. Every element of their attack had been designed to exhaust my resources and silence my questions. The public smear campaign isolated me from potential allies. The mortgage inquiry threatened my financial stability. The insurance denial eliminated my safety net. And the legal ultimatum forced me to choose between bankruptcy through litigation or bankruptcy through settlement. They had built a perfect trap, and they believed I had no way out, but they had underestimated me. I was not a random homeowner who could be bullied into submission. I was an engineer who understood exactly what they had done, and I now had the evidence to prove it. That night, I searched online legal directories for attorneys specializing in HOA disputes and construction fraud. One name appeared repeatedly: Nathan Pierce, a 48-year-old litigator known for taking on corrupt homeowners associations. I dialed his office at 8:45 p.m., expecting voicemail. He answered personally. Mr. Pierce, my name is Derek Hollister. I have evidence that my HOA built an illegal drainage system to flood my home, then filed a lawsuit blaming me for the damage. I have survey data, pipe camera footage, and financial records showing unauthorized expenditures. There was a pause before he responded. Do you have documentation linking any specific individual to the construction decision? I told him about the meeting minutes, quoting Meredith Blackwood. His voice sharpened with interest. Be at my office tomorrow at 8 a.m. Bring everything. If what you are describing is accurate, this is not just an HOA dispute, this is fraud, conspiracy, and potentially criminal negligence. I hung up feeling something I had not experienced since the flood destroyed my basement, the first spark of hope. Nathan Pierce's office occupied the third floor of a modest brick building in downtown Denver, a space that felt more like a war room than a legal practice. Maps covered one wall, annotated with colored pins marking properties involved in past HOA disputes. Filing cabinets lined another, each drawer labeled with case numbers spanning more than 15 years. When I arrived at 7:55 a.m. with a cardboard box containing every piece of evidence I had gathered, Nathan was already waiting with coffee and a yellow legal pad filled with handwritten notes. He shook my hand firmly and led me to a conference table where a second person sat reviewing documents. Mr. Hollister, this is Raymond Foster. He spent 15 years as Director of Public Works for Jefferson County before retiring. I sent him your survey data and camera footage last night, and he has been analyzing it since early this morning. Raymond stood to greet me, a tall man in his early 60s with the weathered hands of someone who had spent decades working in the field rather than behind a desk. Raymond wasted no time with pleasantries. He pulled out a laptop and opened a software program called HECRAS, a standard tool for hydrological modeling that I recognized from my own work. I ran multiple simulations based on your survey data. Mr. Hollister, the results are conclusive. With an average rainfall of 2 inches per hour, this pipe system channels approximately 12,000 gallons toward your property every 60 minutes. The gradient is exactly 3.8%, which is optimal for accelerating water flow without causing erosion damage to the pipe itself. He displayed the simulation on the conference room screen. The animation showed water flowing from the central neighborhood area, hitting the artificial obstructions I had identified, then redirecting through the underground network to emerge behind my fence. Without this system, natural drainage would carry that water east toward the creek. Your home would receive minimal runoff. Someone spent between $85,000 and $100,000 on materials alone to ensure the opposite would happen. I asked the question that had been troubling me since I first discovered the pipe. How could contractors install a 24-inch drainage line beneath 4 residential properties without anyone noticing? Raymond nodded as if he had anticipated the inquiry. The pipe runs at a depth of nearly 6 feet, well below standard utility lines. Based on the installation timeline you identified, the work was completed in March 2021. That coincides with the period when many residents travel for spring break and school holidays. A competent crew could complete the excavation, pipe laying, and site restoration within 10 to 12 days if they worked extended hours. They would disguise the construction as routine landscape maintenance or utility repair. By the time homeowners returned, the ground would be leveled and seeded. Within a few months, grass would cover any evidence of disturbance. The explanation made sense. I had purchased my home in May of that year, 2 months after the construction was completed. By then, the pipe had already been buried and concealed. Nathan opened a folder containing documents he had obtained through preliminary legal channels. I submitted a records request to the HOA yesterday using a sympathetic resident as the requesting party. Most of what came back was heavily redacted. But this document slipped through. He slid a page across the table marked Executive Session, Confidential, and dated January 15th, 2021. Apparently, one of the newer board members was responsible for processing the request and did not realize this particular file should have been withheld. By the time Meredith discovered the error, the document had already been copied and delivered. What I saw on that page changed everything I understood about why my home had been targeted. The minutes recorded a closed-door meeting attended only by board members, discussing what they called drainage remediation options following flooding that had damaged properties near Meredith Blackwood's home in 2019. One passage stood out in stark clarity. President Blackwood proposed redirecting water flow toward the southeastern section of the subdivision. where population density is lower and property values are comparatively reduced. The board discussed liability concerns but agreed that the alternative, continued flooding in the Central District, would cause greater financial harm to the community's most valuable assets. Motion passed unanimously. Funding to be allocated from the Special Maintenance Reserve. No formal permits to be requested due to time constraints. I read those words 3 times, each reading amplifying the fury building in my chest. They had known exactly what they were doing. They had weighed my property against Meredith's and decided that my loss was acceptable. I was not collateral damage. I was a calculated sacrifice, chosen because my home was worth less than the investments they were protecting. Nathan produced one final document that completed the picture. In August 2020, Meredith Blackwood signed a contract to sell her home for $2.6 million. The buyer conducted a standard inspection that included an environmental risk assessment. The inspector noted elevated flood risk based on terrain analysis and historical damage reports from adjacent properties. The buyer withdrew, and the sale collapsed. He paused to let the information settle. 7 months later, the drainage project was approved. 5 months after that, the pipe was installed, terminating behind your fence. Meredith could not sell her home because of flood risk, so she eliminated the risk by transferring it to you. When the system worked exactly as designed, flooding your basement instead of her lawn, she launched a legal attack to ensure you could never prove what happened. The logic was flawless and horrifying. My $47,000 in damages had been engineered to protect her $2.8 million investment. Raymond gathered his materials and prepared to leave, offering one final observation. In 30 years of working with water systems, I have never seen anything quite like this. Someone with technical knowledge helped design this system. Someone who understood hydraulics and liability. That person is not listed in any county record. You are looking for a contractor who was paid through channels that avoided standard reporting. After he departed, Nathan and I sat in silence for several moments. The evidence painted a picture of deliberate fraud and conspiracy among board members, but evidence alone would not win this case. We needed testimony from someone who had witnessed the decisions being made or the payments being authorized. Nathan broke the silence with the question that would define our next phase. The pipe was installed by a contractor who supervised the work and ensured no permits were filed. That person either works for the HOA or was hired specifically because they would not ask questions. We need to find them before Meredith realizes how much we already know. Somewhere in Pinecrest Ridge, there was a witness who had been paid to stay silent, and somewhere in that silence was the key to proving everything. The HOA did not wait for us to make the first move. 3 weeks after I met with Nathan Pierce, I received official notification that Pinecrest Ridge Estates Homeowners Association had filed a formal lawsuit in Jefferson County District Court. The case was titled Pinecrest Ridge Estates HOA v. Derek Hollister, a deliberate choice that positioned them as the aggrieved party and me as the defendant. The complaint demanded $175,000 for drainage system damage, $68,000 in legal fees, and an additional $15,000 for what they called reputational harm to the community. The total claim exceeded $258,000, a sum designed not to recover actual losses but to crush me into submission before I could mount a credible defense. Along with the lawsuit, the HOA filed a prejudgment lien against my property, a legal maneuver that would trigger immediate consequences I had not anticipated. Nathan reviewed the filing with grim familiarity. They are trying to bankrupt you through litigation costs alone. The goal is to force a settlement before any evidence reaches a courtroom. The media campaign began within days of the lawsuit being filed. A local newspaper, the Denver Suburban Journal, published an article titled Drainage Dispute Divides Upscale Community that presented the conflict as a story of one stubborn homeowner threatening the welfare of 127 families. The reporter had interviewed Meredith Blackwood extensively, quoting her concerns about protecting our residents from individuals who prioritize personal convenience over community responsibility. My perspective was reduced to a single sentence, noting that I had declined to comment pending litigation. The article included a photograph of flooded streets near the central neighborhood area, an image from the 2019 storms that had nothing to do with my property but created a visual association between my name and community damage. Within 48 hours, The story had been shared across neighborhood message boards with commentary painting me as an obstacle to progress and safety. The community meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday evening at the Pinecrest Ridge Clubhouse. The HOA had sent 3 separate email blasts urging residents to attend, each message emphasizing the threat to property values posed by the ongoing litigation and referencing the newspaper article as evidence of growing public attention. When I arrived at 6:45 p.m., 147 residents had already filled the main hall, many of them clutching copies of the article or printouts from online discussion threads. The turnout was unprecedented for a community meeting, a testament to the effectiveness of Meredith's fear campaign. She stood at the front podium with a professional presentation displayed on a large screen behind her. Gerald Ashford sat at a table nearby, flanked by 2 people I did not recognize but who carried themselves with the polished confidence of hired consultants. I took a seat in the back row and waited for my allotted time to speak. Meredith's presentation lasted 45 minutes and covered the history of drainage challenges in Pinecrest Ridge with carefully selected statistics and emotional appeals. She displayed photographs of water damage from various storms, emphasizing the financial losses suffered by hard-working families and the community's collective investment in infrastructure improvements. She mentioned my name only twice, each time in the context of ongoing legal matters that prevented her from discussing specifics, but her implications were clear. The problem had a source, and the source was sitting in the back of the room. When she finished, Gerald Ashford invited questions from the audience, all of which reinforced the narrative Meredith had constructed. No one asked about the $127,000 expenditure. No one questioned why drainage improvements had been built during spring break when most residents were away. The audience had already decided who was responsible before I spoke a single word. My opportunity to speak came at 8:30 p.m. After nearly 2 hours of testimony that had shaped the audience's perception, Gerald introduced me with barely concealed hostility, noting that I had been given 5 minutes to share my perspective, pursuant to the meeting's standard presentation guidelines. I walked to the podium carrying a folder containing my survey data, pipe camera screenshots, and excerpts from Raymond's flow simulation. I began by explaining my professional background and the measurements I had taken of the terrain and drainage infrastructure. I showed the images of the concealed pipe behind my fence and described the simulation demonstrating that water had been deliberately channeled toward my property from the central neighborhood area. The room remained silent, but I could feel skepticism radiating from the audience like heat from pavement. Before I could present the financial records linking the drainage project to HOA expenditures, Gerald Ashford interrupted. "Mr. Hollister, I must remind you that Section 4 of our meeting bylaws prohibits discussion of matters currently under active litigation. Continuing this presentation could expose both you and the association to legal complications." He gestured toward the exit with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "The board will review any evidence you wish to submit through proper legal channels. Thank you for participating in tonight's discussion." The audience applauded as I gathered my materials and returned to my seat. 147 people had watched me be silenced by procedural technicalities, my evidence unheard, and my credibility further eroded. The meeting concluded with a resolution authorizing the board to pursue all legal remedies necessary to protect community interests. No vote was taken. No objections were recorded. The machine had operated exactly as designed. The financial pressure intensified over the following week. The pre-judgment lien the HOA had filed against my property triggered automatic reviews from both my mortgage lender and insurance company. The bank sent formal notice that they were initiating a loan status evaluation, warning that any judgment against me would provide grounds to accelerate the remaining balance of $287,000. My homeowner's insurance, already denied for the flood claim, formally terminated my policy effective 30 days from the notice date. The letter cited material change in risk profile based on recorded property liens as justification. I calculated my exposure if the case went to trial, and I lost the HOA judgment. Accelerated mortgage, legal fees, and property devaluation would total approximately $400,000. Bankruptcy would be inevitable. Everything I had built over 20 years would be erased. Late that night, Linda Mayfield called with information that reignited my hope. I was searching my email for something unrelated and found a message in my archived folder from February last year. I must have glanced at it and forgotten, since it seemed like HOA administrative nonsense at the time. But Gerald Ashford accidentally copied me on a message meant for someone else. She forwarded the email while we spoke. The message was dated February 2021, 1 month before construction began. Gerald had written, "Ensure pipe terminates past the boundary of Lot 1823. No surface evidence should remain in common areas. Payment will be processed through the Special Maintenance Reserve account. No itemized invoices required." Lot 1823 was my property. The email confirmed deliberate targeting. I called Nathan immediately. "We have written proof that Gerald Ashford directed the contractor to route the pipe specifically toward my home, and they used an unaudited account to hide the payments." Nathan's response was immediate. "Forward everything to my office. This changes the case from property damage to conspiracy and fraud. We file our counterclaim tomorrow." The discovery process began 14 days after Nathan filed our counterclaim. Under court rules, we issued subpoenas requiring the HOA to produce all documents related to drainage projects, board meeting minutes, financial records, and communications between officers and contractors. The HOA's attorneys initially resisted, claiming that internal deliberations were protected by executive privilege and that releasing certain documents would violate the privacy of uninvolved residents. Judge Patricia Coleman dismissed their objections in a brief hearing, ordering full compliance within 2 weeks or face sanctions of $5,000 per day of delay. On the 13th day, a courier delivered 11 boxes containing over 2,300 pages of documents to Nathan's office. Most of the materials were routine administrative records, but buried within the stack were 127 pages that had been heavily redacted with black marker. Nathan immediately filed a motion challenging the redactions, arguing that they concealed evidence directly relevant to our claims, while we waited for the court's ruling on the redacted documents. An unexpected visitor appeared at Nathan's office. His name was Carl Whitman, 52 years old, a licensed contractor who had operated in Jefferson County for over 2 decades. He arrived unannounced on a Thursday afternoon, visibly nervous and clutching a manila folder against his chest. Carl explained that he had seen the Denver Suburban Journal article about the lawsuit and had been following community discussions ever since. When word spread that a counterclaim had been filed alleging fraud and conspiracy, he realized the situation had escalated beyond anything he could ignore. "I was hired to install that drainage system," he said without preamble. "Meredith Blackwood contacted me directly in January 2021. She said it was an emergency project that needed to be completed before the spring rains. She promised a bonus if I finished within 3 weeks and kept the work quiet." He opened the folder and spread its contents across the table. What I saw made my heart stop. The first document was a hand-drawn diagram showing the pipe route from the central neighborhood area to a point labeled SE Boundary Lot 1823. The drawing included measurements, depth specifications, and notes about concealment techniques. At the bottom right corner was a signature I recognized from every HOA notice I had received since moving to Pinecrest Ridge, Meredith Blackwood. Carl explained that she had given him this drawing during their initial meeting, insisting that no formal engineering plans be created. She told me the county approval process would take too long and that the community could not wait. I should have walked away right then, but she offered 40% above my standard rate. I needed the money. When I asked why he had kept these documents for over 2 years, Carl's expression hardened. "I have been in this business long enough to know that when someone asks you to work without proper documentation, you keep your own records. If anything went wrong, I needed proof that I was following their instructions, not acting on my own." Carl pulled out printouts of text messages exchanged between himself and Gerald Ashford during the construction period. One message dated March 15th, 2021, was particularly damning. "Ensure pipe angles toward southeast property. Do not let water flow back toward Central Plaza under any circumstances." The third piece of evidence was a stack of payment receipts totaling $104,000, all drawn from an account labeled Special Maintenance Reserve Fund. The payments had been made in 4 installments over 6 weeks, each one signed by Gerald Ashford and countersigned by Meredith Blackwood. None of the receipts appeared in the HOA's published annual financial statements. which listed the drainage project as a single line item of $127,000. Nathan cross-referenced the amounts with industry cost standards and found that a project of this scope should have cost between $85,000 and $100,000, consistent with Raymond's earlier estimate. The $23,000 gap between Carl's payments and the budgeted amount had simply vanished, with no invoices, no contractor records, and no explanation in any HOA document. "They still owe me money from that job," Carl said bitterly. When I asked about the remaining balance, Gerald told me the project was over budget, and I should be grateful for what I received. Then he warned me that if I complained, he would report me to the state licensing board for code violations. Carl had kept silent for over 2 years, paralyzed by the threat to his livelihood. But the counterclaim changed his calculation. If this goes to court and they lose, they will look for someone to blame. I would rather testify on your side than wait for them to throw me under the bus. His pragmatism was understandable. He had been complicit in the construction, but he had also been manipulated and cheated by the same people who had targeted me. We needed his testimony, and he needed protection from the consequences of his silence. As I examined Meredith's hand-drawn diagram, a memory surfaced from my first weeks in Pinecrest Ridge. I had noticed the drainage outlet behind my fence shortly after moving in and had asked about it during a chance encounter with Meredith at a neighborhood gathering. She had smiled reassuringly and told me it was part of an old system that had not been used in years. "Nothing to worry about," she had said. "It is just leftover infrastructure from when the subdivision was originally developed." I had believed her. But according to Carl's timeline and the payment receipts, that pipe had been installed in March 2021, 2 months after I closed on my property. Meredith had looked me in the eye and lied. Knowing that the concrete channel behind my fence was designed specifically to flood my basement while protecting her $2.8 million investment, the revelation transformed my anger into something colder and more focused. This was not merely negligence. This was calculated deception, executed with precision. Nathan spent the following week integrating Carl's testimony with the case file we had been building. Raymond Foster, who had begun preparing his technical analysis shortly after our initial meeting, completed his expert report within days. The 47-page document concluded that the drainage system had been intentionally designed to redirect approximately 12,000 gallons of water per hour toward my property during heavy rainfall. His damage assessment valued the harm to my home at $347,000, including structural repairs, foundation remediation, electrical system replacement, and destroyed personal property. Nathan added claims for emotional distress, reputational damage, and punitive damages based on clear evidence of intentional misconduct. Our amended counterclaim demanded compensation totaling just over $3 million, calculated not merely to recover my losses, but to hold the perpetrators accountable for deliberate fraud. The counterclaim was filed on a Friday morning at the Jefferson County Courthouse. Nathan arranged for copies to be served simultaneously on Meredith Blackwood, Gerald Ashford, and the HOA's registered agent. By 4 p.m., I received a text from Linda Mayfield. "Meredith just left an emergency board meeting looking like she had seen a ghost. Whatever you did, it is working." I sat alone in my damaged basement that evening, surrounded by water stains and ruined possessions, holding a copy of the counterclaim. For the first time since the flood, I felt the balance of power shifting. They had built a system designed to destroy me quietly, now that the system was about to be exposed in open court, where no amount of redaction could hide the truth. The hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. on a Wednesday morning in May, nearly 11 months after floodwater had first invaded my basement. Courtroom 4 of the Jefferson County District Court was smaller than I had imagined, with wooden benches arranged like church pews and fluorescent lights casting a pale glow over everyone present. I arrived at 8:30 a.m. with Nathan Pierce, carrying a briefcase filled with documents we had spent months assembling. The gallery held 67 observers by the time proceedings began, including 23 Pinecrest Ridge residents and 4 journalists with notepads and recording devices. At the defense table, Meredith Blackwood sat rigidly beside her attorney, her face composed into an expression of dignified confidence that did not quite reach her eyes. Judge Patricia Coleman entered precisely at 9 a.m. and called the hearing to order. Nathan rose to deliver his opening statement, his voice calm as he outlined our allegations. "Your Honor, We will demonstrate that the Pinecrest Ridge Estates Homeowners Association, under the direction of President Meredith Blackwood and Vice President Gerald Ashford, constructed an unauthorized drainage system designed to redirect floodwater away from high-value properties and toward my client's home. We will show that this construction was concealed from county oversight, funded through an unaudited reserve account, and followed by a coordinated campaign to blame my client for damage that the defendants themselves engineered. He began with Raymond Foster's technical testimony. Raymond walked the court through his HECRAS simulation, showing animated visualizations of water flow before and after the pipe installation. Without the drainage system, Mr. Hollister's property would have received minimal runoff. With it in place, thousands of gallons were channeled toward his basement every hour during heavy rainfall. The HOA's attorney challenged his methodology aggressively, but Judge Coleman overruled several objections as argumentative, and Raymond's responses remained precise and unshakable. Carl Whitman testified next, and the atmosphere shifted perceptibly as he described his contact with Meredith in January 2021 and the payments he had collected through the Special Maintenance Reserve account. When Nathan presented the hand-drawn diagram with Meredith's signature, Carl confirmed its origin. She drew this herself while we sat in her kitchen. She showed me exactly where she wanted the pipe to end and told me to make sure no water would flow back toward her property. The HOA's attorney attempted to discredit Carl as a disgruntled contractor, but Nathan produced bank records showing payment discrepancies. Judge Coleman sustained our objection when the defense tried to exclude the financial evidence. Carl then read aloud Gerald Ashford's text message, "Ensure pipe angles toward southeast property. Do not let water flow back toward Central Plaza under any circumstances." The journalists in the front row scribbled furiously. The pivotal moment came when Nathan called Meredith Blackwood to the stand. She answered initial questions with practiced composure, deflecting responsibility to committees and contractors. Nathan let her establish her narrative before beginning cross-examination. "Mrs. Blackwood, this document bears your signature alone. Did you personally provide these instructions to the contractor?" Meredith hesitated before responding. "I may have sketched some general concepts, but the final design was handled by professionals." Nathan presented the next exhibit. "Then, can you explain Vice President Ashford's text message instructing the contractor to ensure water flows toward the southeast property and away from Central Plaza? Your home is located in Central Plaza, is it not?" Her composure began to fracture. Nathan pressed forward with questions about the failed home sale in 2020 and the timing of the drainage project approval just months later. Then Nathan delivered the final blow. "Mrs. Blackwood, when Mr. Hollister asked you about the drainage outlet shortly after he moved in, you told him it was an old system not used in years. Construction receipts show that the pipe was installed 2 months after he purchased his home. Did you lie to him?" The courtroom fell silent. Meredith's hands gripped the witness stand railing, her knuckles white. The pressure of accumulated evidence and 67 watching observers finally broke through her defenses. Her voice cracked, not with calculated admission, but with raw frustration. "You do not understand what it was like. In 2019, my home flooded 3 times. I watched everything I had worked for drain away. The buyer walked away from a $2.6 million sale because of flood risk. I was desperate. Hollister was he was in the wrong place." The words escaped before her attorney could intervene, a confession born of exhaustion rather than strategy. Nathan stood motionless, allowing the admission to settle into the record. The HOA's attorney rose to object, but the damage was irreversible. Meredith had acknowledged, in open court, that she had acted to protect her property at my expense. Several Pinecrest Ridge residents shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Gerald Ashford rose quietly and exited through the side door without looking back, near the rear. The HOA's insurance representative was engaged in urgent whispered conversation with a colleague. Judge Coleman called a 15-minute recess, and when proceedings resumed, the dynamic had fundamentally changed. The HOA's attorney requested permission to approach the bench. I learned later that the insurance representative had delivered an emergency risk assessment during the break, warning that continued litigation would expose the carrier to punitive damages exceeding policy limits. When they returned, the attorney announced that his clients wished to explore settlement discussions. Nathan turned to me with a slight nod, confirming our strategy had worked. Judge Coleman adjourned the hearing pending negotiations. noting for the record that the evidence raised serious questions about intentional misconduct, fiduciary breach, and potential violations of state construction and environmental statutes. As I walked out of the courtroom, I passed Meredith sitting alone at the defense table. Her attorney had stepped away. Her allies had distanced themselves for the first time since this ordeal began. I saw her as she truly was not a powerful adversary, but a desperate woman whose choices had finally consumed everything she had tried to protect. 47 days after the hearing, Nathan Pierce called with the final settlement terms. The HOA had agreed to pay $8.2 million to resolve all claims. The breakdown reflected the full scope of damage their conspiracy had caused: $892,000 for property repairs and structural remediation, $1.2 million for emotional distress and reputational harm, $4.5 million in punitive damages for intentional misconduct, and the remainder covering legal fees, interest, and compensation for Carl Whitman and 7 other affected residents, including Linda Mayfield. The insurance carrier had covered $1.8 million before withdrawing from the policy entirely. The remaining $6.4 million would come from HOA reserves, the forced sale of community amenities, and a special assessment of $33,858 levied against each of the 127 households over 5 years. The personal consequences for those responsible were equally severe. Meredith Blackwood resigned as HOA president within hours of the settlement announcement. Under the terms of our agreement, she was prohibited from holding any HOA management position in Colorado for 10 years. A lien was placed on her property to guarantee her share of the damages, and the home she had fought so desperately to protect was now listed for sale at a reduced price. Gerald Ashford faced a separate $45,000 personal fine for his role in the conspiracy and quietly moved out of Pinecrest Ridge before the first assessment checks were due. Jefferson County placed the HOA under a 3-year oversight period, requiring independent approval for any expenditure exceeding $10,000. The drainage pipe that had flooded my basement was excavated and removed at HOA expense, replaced by a properly permitted system designed by licensed engineers. The Denver Post published a feature article about the case, and I received 247 messages from Pinecrest Ridge residents in the weeks that followed. 89 were apologies. The community that had condemned me as a pariah now acknowledged the truth they had refused to see. I accepted their words without bitterness. They had been manipulated by people they trusted, fed lies wrapped in the language of community protection. The real villains had been exposed and held accountable through evidence, procedure, and the unwavering pursuit of justice. On the day the settlement funds cleared, I stood in my backyard where the old drainage outlet had once pointed at my property like a weapon. The concrete was gone now, replaced by fresh soil and new grass. I held a small fragment of the original pipe, a piece I had saved as a reminder of everything I had endured. The water that fell on Pinecrest Ridge would now flow where nature intended, toward the eastern creek, rather than into my basement. I placed the fragment on my workbench beside my engineering credentials. Some people build systems to protect themselves at others' expense. I had built a case that proved the truth always finds its way to the surface, just like water seeking its natural path. This story proves that one person armed with evidence and determination can stand against any system built on lies. If you have faced HOA abuse, drainage disputes, or neighborhood injustice, you are not alone. Follow the HOA stories for more real cases of residents fighting back and winning. Share your experience in the comments. Your story might be next.